The last sound I heard in my previous life was the sterile beep of a heart monitor flatlining, a final dismissive note to a lifetime of quiet despair. The last sight was the retreating back of the man I had called my husband for 25 years, Ethan Reed, as he walked out of my hospital room to marry his true love, Isabella. His final words still echoed in the void I was falling through. "Lena, I gave you 25 years of a good life. I gave you the position of a colonel's wife. You should be satisfied. I don't owe you anything." I didn't owe him anything either. Not my youth, not my devotion, and certainly not my father's life. The shock of waking up was a physical blow. Sunlight, warm and golden, streamed through the window of my old bedroom, the one in our small village house. The scent of damp earth and blooming jasmine filled the air, a stark contrast to the antiseptic smell of the hospital. I was alive. More than alive, I was back. Blinking, I focused on the man sitting across from me. Ethan Reed. But this was an Ethan from a quarter-century ago. His almond-shaped eyes, which would later become so cold and distant, were now fixed on me with an expression of concerned intensity. He was still in his army uniform, the crisp green fabric a symbol of the duty that would become his prison and my chain. "Lena," he said, his voice softer, younger than I remembered. "You can't stay here alone. It's not right. Come stay with my family. It's what your father would have wanted. Let me take care of you." The words were a perfect echo from the past. This was the third day after my father's funeral. In my first life, drowning in a grief so profound I could barely breathe, I had grasped at this offer like a lifeline. He was the man my father had died saving. Of course he wasn't a bad person. And he wasn't, not in the mustache-twirling villain sense. He was just a man who resented his obligation and punished the living reminder of it for decades. But now that grief was tempered by the acid burn of hindsight. I saw the calculation behind his concern. Taking in the poor orphan daughter of his savior was the first step in a meticulously crafted plan to buff his reputation as an honorable man, all while keeping me docile and out of the way. "No," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. His eyebrows shot up. "Lena, be reasonable. You're all alone. I'm 18, Ethan. I'm an adult. I can take care of myself." I kept my gaze level, refusing to be cowed by the displeasure that flickered across his handsome features. "We're not related. It wouldn't be proper for me to live with you. And I have other relatives." It was a lie. The relatives were distant and uninterested, but it was a convenient shield. "Your father gave his life for me," he insisted, a rehearsed line if I ever heard one. "Taking care of you is my responsibility. Your other relatives, they aren't reliable." "Enough," I cut him off, my tone dismissive. "I understand your sense of duty, Ethan, but I release you from it. I don't need your care." I brushed off his further attempts at persuasion with a few non-committal words until, frustration evident in the set of his shoulders, he finally left. The moment the door closed behind him, a breath I didn't know I'd been holding escaped my lungs. It was the first taste of a freedom I hadn't known in 2 lifetimes. I waited until his footsteps faded, then slipped out and went to our neighbor, old Mr. Abernathy, to borrow his bicycle. The rusty frame was familiar beneath my hands. I rode for over an hour, the wind whipping through my hair, cleansing me of the stifling atmosphere of grief and expectation. I rode until I reached the train station at the county seat. Our village was remote, a place time was only just beginning to touch. Transportation was a far cry from what it would become. If you wanted to leave, you relied on the old, slow, green-painted trains. "Next train out is Saturday," the ticket seller said, his voice bored. 3 days. "I'll take a ticket," I said, my voice firm. I paid with a few of the precious yuan notes from the small stash I had. In 3 days I would leave this isolated, suffocating mountain village. I would leave the ghost of my father and the shadow of Ethan Reed behind. But as I turned, ticket clutched tightly in my hand, my heart stuttered to a halt. There he was, Ethan, standing at the station entrance, his tall, lean frame unmistakable. What was he doing here? My eyes darted behind him and I saw her. A woman with a delicate figure and a face that would, in time, become the source of all my insecurities. Isabella. Ethan's so-called white moonlight, his childhood sweetheart. She was glaring at me with a hatred that felt both premature and deeply personal. In that moment, the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. I wasn't supposed to know about Isabella yet. In my first life, I wouldn't meet her until after Ethan and I were married. He had sent her away early, clearing the path for his dutiful reputation-burnishing marriage to me. He was here to see her off, just as he would secretly visit her throughout our marriage. He noticed me, his expression shifting from surprise to a flicker of guilt before settling into a mask of authority. He strode over, his boots clicking on the concrete. "Lena," he said, his voice tight with displeasure. "What are you doing here?" I said nothing, my gaze fixed on Isabella. "Forget it, it doesn't matter," he continued, misreading my silence. "When you get back, pack your things. You're moving in with us." "I'm not moving in with you, Ethan," I answered, my voice cold and final. "We're not related. What would people say? And you'll have a wife of your own someday. I won't get in the way of that." My words left him stunned. He wasn't used to defiance, especially not from me. "How can you say that, Lena? Your father." I said enough. I cut him off again, my patience fraying. I gestured with my chin towards Isabella. "Isn't that girl waiting for you?" His face tightened. "She's just a high school classmate. She's leaving, so I came to see her off." So hypocritical, I thought, the bitterness of familiar taste. Already keeping one woman in the dark while promising a future to another. I didn't dignify his lie with a response. With a careless shrug I didn't feel, I got back on Mr. Abernathy's bicycle and rode away, leaving him and his precious Isabella behind. In 3 days I would be gone for good. The ride home was different. Slower. As the initial adrenaline faded, I allowed myself to see the world around me. Fields of golden canola flowers stretched to the horizon, their sweet, heavy fragrance filling the air. Butterflies danced in the warm spring breeze. For the first time since my rebirth, I felt a flicker of something other than resentment or grim determination. It was the faint, fragile taste of freedom. By the time I reached home, evening was settling in. Smoke curled from chimneys as families gathered for their evening meal. After returning the bicycle, I headed inside to cook my own solitary dinner. But I wasn't alone. 3 uninvited guests sat in my small living room. Mr. and Mrs. Reed, Ethan's parents, and Ethan himself, having apparently returned from the station. In my first life I had treated these people like my own family. They had seemed so kind, so simple. But their kindness was a tool, their simplicity a mask. They had been complicit in every step of my entrapment, soothing my doubts with platitudes about a woman's place and the cruelty of gossip. Mrs. Reed launched into her performance the moment I entered. "Oh, Lena, you poor unfortunate child. Look at you having to fend for yourself. If you don't mind, come live with us. Let me take care of you. Seeing you eat leftovers, it breaks my heart. I'll treat you like my own daughter." Mr. Reed and Ethan sat in silence, nodding along. It was a well-rehearsed play, and I had been the star victim. I remained silent, stoking the fire in the stove to warm my food, letting their words wash over me. Seeing my lack of response, Mr. Reed turned to his son. "Ethan, you'd better treat Lena well in the future. The Miller family saved your life. Without her father, you wouldn't be here." It was a clever gambit designed to reinforce Ethan's sense of duty and make me feel beholden. Mrs. Reed chimed in. Now, don't be harsh on the boy. We truly owe the Miller family. From now on, you must treat Lena as the most important person in your life. Do you understand? The most important person." The irony was so sharp it felt like a physical cut. I remembered my deathbed, the cold in my bones, and Ethan's final, cruel confession. He had said my father saving him was an accident, that he would rather have died than carry such a debt. They had schemed against me from the beginning, yet they were the ones who gained a good reputation while I was the one used and discarded. "Uncle, Auntie," I said, finally turning to face them. "I appreciate your kindness. But I won't be moving in with you. I'm 18. I can take care of myself. Besides, Ethan will marry a wife someday. I can't get in the way of that." I gestured to the pot on the stove. "I'm tired now, so I'll eat." I just wanted them to leave. In 3 days none of this would matter. But Mrs. Reed wasn't done. She stepped forward and grabbed my hand. "Lena, if you're worried Ethan won't find a wife later, why don't you just marry him? I've always liked a gentle, quiet girl like you. And Ethan likes you too." I stared at her, my disgust a cold stone in my stomach. They were moving straight to the final gambit. And she knew that the person Ethan truly cared for was Isabella. Just then the village loudspeaker crackled to life. "Call for Corporal Ethan Reed from the army. Urgent." The announcement was a deus ex machina. Ethan shot to his feet. "Mom, Dad, I need to get back to my unit." He turned and left without a backward glance, just as he had in my first life. This was it. This was the moment he would leave, and Isabella would be sent away, and the stage would be set for my long, slow ruin. But not this time. The next morning I began to pack for my new life. The one advantage of being an orphan was the lack of ties. I stuffed my few good clothes into a suitcase and then, with careful, deliberate stitches, sewed all the family savings, 410 yuan, into the lining of my undergarments. It was everything, our household savings and the compensation for my father's sacrifice. In my first life I had used it to buy Ethan a wristwatch he never wore. This time it was my seed money for freedom. When I finished it was nearly noon. I lit 3 sticks of incense and placed them before the memorial tablets of my parents. "Dad, Mom," I whispered, the smoke curling towards the ceiling. "I'm leaving. I'm going to Ocean City. I've heard the reforms are going well there. Opportunities are everywhere. Your daughter is going to try and live a proper life. Don't worry. I'll take good care of myself." I took a deep, shuddering breath, the scent of sandalwood filling my senses. "Without Ethan," I vowed, my voice firm, "your daughter will only grow stronger." The morning of my departure dawned with a clarity that felt prophetic. A crisp, cool air swept through the village, carrying away the last remnants of haze. I had slipped out before first light, my small suitcase feeling not like a burden but a promise. I didn't look back at the little house where I had been born and where I had, in another life, withered away. My future was no longer within those walls. The old green train was exactly as I remembered. Crowded, noisy, and smelling of coal smoke, unwashed bodies, and anticipation. As I found a hard seat by the window and the train lurched into motion, a wave of emotion so powerful it stole my breath washed over me. It wasn't just joy or relief. It was a profound tectonic shift in my soul. The shackles of a predetermined future were breaking, one clattering rail tie at a time. I watched the familiar mountains and fields of my youth recede, not with nostalgia, but with the fierce satisfaction of a prisoner leaving her cage. Ocean City was over 500 kilometers away. The journey required 2 transfers, and as fate, or cruel irony, would have it, the first transfer point was the very city where Ethan was stationed. I had a layover of more than 2 hours. The thought of seeking him out never once crossed my mind. He was a relic of a past I was determined to outrun. Instead, I left my suitcase in the station's left luggage office and ventured out to find a bite to eat. The streets around the station were a chaotic symphony of honking bicycles, shouting vendors, and the general buzz of a regional hub coming to life in the new economic era. I found a small, clean-looking restaurant and slid into a corner table, ordering a simple bowl of beef noodles. I was blowing on the steaming broth to cool it when the bell above the door chimed. I glanced up and my blood ran cold. There they were. Ethan in his crisp uniform and Isabella, clinging to his arm. She wore a light peach-colored dress that made her look like a delicate flower among the drab crowds. So he had already managed to get her situated here, close to his base. Our eyes met across the cramped room. His registered first shock, then a flush of what looked like embarrassment, before his face settled into its usual mask of stern control. He disentangled himself from Isabella and walked over, his presence immediately casting a shadow over my table. "Lena," he said, his voice a low rumble of disapproval. "What are you doing here?" "I'm transferring trains," I answered evenly, picking up my chopsticks. "I didn't come looking for you." "Transferring? To where?" he pressed, his brow furrowed. He couldn't comprehend a world where my movements weren't centered around him. Before I could answer, not that I owed him one, Isabella glided over, placing a possessive hand on his arm. "Ethan, darling, don't bombard the poor girl." She turned a saccharine smile towards me. "Let me talk to her. Why don't you go check if our noodles are ready?" Ethan hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with this arrangement. "Lena, this is Isabella, a comrade from the unit," he said, a weak and transparent lie. With a final, conflicted glance, he walked towards the counter. The moment he was out of earshot, Isabella's sweet smile vanished, replaced by a mask of pure venom. She leaned in close, her voice a venomous whisper meant for my ears alone. "You pathetic country bumpkin. Do you really think a man like Ethan would ever want you?" she hissed. "Chasing him all the way to the army base. You have no shame." "I know all about it. You're trying to trap him because your wretched father saved his life. Your whole family is nothing but a chain around his neck. In my first life she had said similar things to me in private, and each word had been a shard of glass in my heart. I had swallowed my rage, afraid that any retaliation would make Ethan despise me more. I had endured and endured until there was nothing left of me to break. But in this life Ethan meant less than nothing to me. Why should I hold back? A wrong unavenged would only rot in my heart. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the tiled floor. The restaurant quieted. With all the strength I could muster, I swung my open hand and slapped her across the face. The crack echoed through the room. I had put my whole body into it, and 5 red fingerprints bloomed instantly on her pale cheek. Caught completely off guard, she stumbled, falling against a nearby table with a cry. Shock, then a performative pain filled her eyes. She clutched her face, her body crumpling into a picture of pitiful victimhood. "Ethan," she wailed, her voice trembling with manufactured tears. "Ethan, it hurts so much." He was at her side in an instant, his face a thundercloud of anger. He looked from her sobbing form to my standing, defiant one. "Lena, are you insane?" he roared, pulling Isabella to her feet. "Apologize to her. Right now." Hidden from his view, Isabella shot me a look of pure, triumphant mockery. Any appetite I had was gone. I felt a cold, clean clarity. There was no point in explaining. He would never believe me over his precious Isabella. Arguing would only tether me to them for a moment longer. I picked up my small bag and turned to leave. Seeing me ignore his command in front of the entire restaurant, his anger boiled over. "Lena, if you don't apologize, don't you ever expect me to acknowledge you again." I stopped at the door but didn't turn back. His words were meant to be a threat, but to me they were a gift. "Don't worry, Ethan," I said, my voice cold and clear, carrying across the silent room. "I promise you, you will never have to see me again." For the first time, I heard a note of genuine panic in his voice. "What do you mean by that?" "Exactly what you think it means," I replied, finally turning to face him. I looked him straight in the eye, this man for whom I had wasted a lifetime. "Ethan, my father may have saved you, but you don't owe me marriage. Let go of that burden. It was an accident. If it had been anyone else in that river, my father would have jumped in to save them too." I took a step closer, my gaze unwavering. "And most importantly, I am not so pitiful that I need to use his sacrifice to blackmail you into marrying me." His expression shifted. The anger faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion and then unmistakably a trace of guilt. "Lena, I didn't mean it like that." But I didn't want to hear his excuses, his justifications, his lies. I waved a hand, cutting him off, and walked out of the restaurant and back towards the station. I hadn't expected him to follow me. "Lena, wait." His hand caught my arm, spinning me around. "Let me take you home. It's not safe for a girl to travel alone." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Anyone watching would have thought him a chivalrous, concerned man. I simply looked at him in silence, knowing this charade wouldn't last. Sure enough, a loud crash came from the restaurant, followed by Isabella's dramatic cry. She had accidentally knocked over their table, the newly served noodles spilling all over her beautiful dress. The choice was made for him, as it always was. His concern for me evaporated instantly. He pulled his wallet from his pocket, shoved 100 yuan note into my hand. A king's ransom, a payment to ease his conscience. "Call me when you get home," he said, the words automatic, empty. Then he turned and rushed back to his true priority without a single backward glance. I stood there for a moment, the paper money feeling dirty in my hand. Then with deliberate slowness I tore it in half, then into quarters, and let the pieces flutter into a nearby trash bin. His guilt had no currency here. I walked into the station, my cheeks wet with tears I hadn't realized I was shedding. They weren't tears of loss or heartbreak, but of finality. It was the pain of a surgeon cutting out a cancerous growth, agonizing but necessary for survival. "Goodbye, Ethan," I whispered to the bustling, uncaring station. "From this moment on, there will be no place for you in my world. My joys, my sorrows, my hopes, my regrets, they will never again have anything to do with you." The train whistle blew, a long, clear note that sounded like a benediction. I boarded my next train, found my seat, and watched as the city that housed him disappeared from view. I was moving forward into the unknown, into a future I would build for myself. The past, with all its pain and promises, was finally truly behind me. The train rattled on for 3 more days, a metal serpent carving its way south. With each passing mile, the landscape outside my window transformed. The rugged, familiar mountains of my youth softened into rolling hills, which then flattened into vast green plains crisscrossed with irrigation canals. The air streaming through the open window grew thicker, warmer, carrying the scent of damp earth and industry. I was leaving the contained world of the village for the sprawling, pulsing heart of a new China. When the train finally screeched to a halt in Ocean City, the noise that assaulted me was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't just the sound of people. It was a cacophony of honking horns, shouting porters, the distant roar of machinery, and a pervasive, energetic hum that seemed to vibrate up from the concrete through the soles of my shoes. I stepped onto the platform, my small suitcase feeling absurdly light in my hand. I was just one more face in a sea of thousands, all surging towards the exits, all chasing a dream. The station itself was a monument to this new ambition. Vast, chaotic, and under construction, with scaffolding clinging to its high ceilings like metal ivy. This was the Ocean City I remembered from my first life, but it was in its infancy. The forest of skyscrapers that would later define its skyline were still just blueprints in an architect's office. Instead, low-rise buildings, many still bearing the faded slogans of a previous era, lined the streets. But the energy was undeniable. It was a city taking its first greedy breaths of capitalism, and the air was electric with possibility. My first task was survival. I found a cheap, grim-looking hostel near the station, paying for a week in advance. The room was a cubicle with a thin cot and a single bare bulb, but it was mine. I carefully unpicked the stitches in my undergarment, my fingers trembling as I counted out the 410 yuan. It was a fortune by village standards, but here in this roaring metropolis, I knew it could vanish in a blink. I spent the next few days walking until my feet ached. I needed to understand this city to find my place in it. My education was basic, my connections non-existent. The only capital I had was this money in my own 2 hands. The business I started had to be simple, requiring little initial investment, easy to enter, and capable of turning a quick profit to keep me afloat. The answer came to me as I wandered through the bustling industrial district on the city's outskirts. It was a landscape of sprawling factories, their gates disgorging thousands of workers at the shift changes. These were young men and women, far from their home provinces, their faces etched with a mixture of exhaustion and ambition. They lived in crowded dormitories, and their biggest daily problem after the grueling work was food. The factory canteens provided basic sustenance, but the food was as monotonous and uninspired as the state-run restaurants in the city center. I saw workers emerging from them, their expressions dull, holding bowls of bland-looking noodles or rice. Anyone with a few extra yuan in their pocket craved something better, something that tasted like home, or at least like someone had cared enough to season it. And that's when the idea crystallized. A restaurant. Not a grand establishment, but a small, clean, private eatery right here, next to the factories. I could cook. It was the one skill I had honed to an art, first for my father and then in my past life, in a futile attempt to win a few grateful glances from Ethan. I could make food that was not only filling but delicious, food that offered a moment of comfort at the end of a hard day. I found a storefront for rent 2 blocks from the main factory gate. It was a narrow, dusty space with a cracked concrete floor and walls stained with grease, but it had a water tap and room for a few tables. The rent was affordable. My heart hammered against my ribs as I signed the simple contract with the elderly landlord, using a fake name, Lena Miller, feeling both terrified and exhilarated. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. I became a familiar face at the supply cooperative, buying a second-hand stove, the largest wok I could afford, pots, pans, and a stack of mismatched bowls and chopsticks. I scrubbed the storefront from floor to ceiling until my arms ached, washing away the grime of neglect. I bought simple ingredients, fresh vegetables, good quality rice, noodles, pork and chicken, and a treasure trove of spices and sauces. I didn't have a sign painted. Instead, I bought a large piece of red paper and with a careful hand wrote 3 characters, Lin de Chufeng, Lena's kitchen. I taped it to the window. On opening day I was a bundle of nerves. I had prepared a large pot of braised pork belly with hard-boiled eggs, a vat of spicy mapo tofu and a mountain of steamed rice. The aromas of star anise, garlic and chili oil filled the small space, weaving out onto the street like an invisible invitation. The first customer was a shy-looking young woman in a factory uniform. She peered in, sniffing the air. "Is it open?" she asked. "Yes, come in," I said, my voice shaking slightly. She ordered the mapo tofu with rice. I served her a generous portion, making sure the tofu was silken and the minced pork was plentiful. I watched, barely breathing, as she took the first bite. Her eyes widened, and then she began to eat with a ravenous intensity one recognized from the fields after a long day's work. When she finished, she looked up at me, a genuine smile on her face. "That was the best meal I've had since I left home," she said. "How much?" I told her the price, a figure I had calculated to be just slightly higher than the canteen but affordable. She paid without hesitation. Word spread among the factory workers with the speed of a gossip in a village. It wasn't just the food, though that was the foundation. It was the cleanliness of the place, the reasonable prices, and most of all, the service. I greeted everyone with a smile. I remembered faces and orders. In a city where everyone was a stranger and state-run waitresses treated customers as interruptions to their day, this small kindness was a revolution. By the end of the first week, there was a line out the door during lunch and dinner rushes. I was working 16-hour days, my body screaming in protest, but my spirit had never felt so light. The clink of yuan in my makeshift cash box was the sound of my independence being forged. A month in, I was drowning. I couldn't cook, serve, clean, and manage the money alone. I needed help. I put another handwritten sign in the window: "Help wanted." 3 young women from the factories applied. They were tired of the assembly line and drawn by the smell of good food and the sight of a bustling business. I hired 2 of them, May and Lynn, their eyes bright with a hunger for something more. I taught them everything I knew about the food and the importance of treating every customer like a guest in our home. At the end of that first month, after I had paid the rent, the suppliers, and my 2 waitresses their wages, I sat on the floor of my tiny room above the restaurant and counted the profit. My hands trembled as I stacked the bills. 3,000 yuan. A net profit of 3,000 yuan. Tears welled in my eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of sheer, unadulterated triumph. In a single month, I had earned what would have taken a factory worker 2 years to save. This was more than money, it was validation. It was proof that I, Lena Miller, orphaned village girl, could not only survive but thrive on my own terms. The mountain had crumbled, the waters had flowed away, and I was still standing, stronger than ever. I was building my own mountain, my own river, with my own 2 hands. 6 months. Felt like a lifetime in the blink of an eye. The rhythm of my new life was relentless and gratifying. Lena's kitchen was no longer a single, struggling storefront. The success of the first location had been so explosive that I had used the profits to rent the 2 adjacent units, knocking down the walls to create a spacious, bustling dining hall that could seat 50 people at a time. The red paper sign was gone, replaced by a proper painted wooden plaque that hung proudly above the door. My staff had grown from 2 to 8. I was no longer just a cook. I was a manager, a bookkeeper, a mentor. I taught May how to manage the kitchen in my absence, and I showed Lynn how to handle the suppliers, teaching her how to negotiate for the best prices without sacrificing quality. They were no longer my employees. They were my lieutenants, their loyalty earned through fair pay and genuine respect. I had become a 10,000 yuan household, a term whispered with a mixture of envy and awe. I rented a small, clean apartment a short walk from the restaurant, a place that was truly my own. It held no ghosts, no memories of a life lived in waiting. It was filled with simple, new furniture and the quiet satisfaction of a day's work well done. One afternoon, during the lull between lunch and dinner rushes, I was at the back of the restaurant, going over the accounts. The familiar clatter of plates and the murmur of conversation were a soothing soundtrack. Then I heard a voice, hesitant and thick with a familiar rural accent, call out from the entrance. "Lena Miller? Is that really you?" I looked up. Standing in the doorway, his face a mask of disbelief, was Uncle Chen from my village. He was dressed in his best, though still shabby, traveling clothes, his worn suitcase looking out of place in my bright modern restaurant. A cold dread trickled down my spine, followed immediately by a surge of defiance. I had known this day might come, but I had hoped to avoid it forever. I forced a smile and stood up. "Uncle Chen, what a surprise." I ushered him to a clean table, ignoring the curious glances from my staff. Please sit. You must be hungry. Let me get you something to eat. I went to the kitchen and personally prepared a generous spread: steamed fish with ginger and scallions, twice-cooked pork, stir-fried greens, and a bowl of clear soup. As he ate, his eyes wide with wonder at both the food and the surroundings, the story tumbled out. After I had left, the Reeds had gone to my house and found it empty. A missing girl was a serious matter. They had alerted the village head, and a search party had scoured the surrounding mountains and rivers for over a month. Everyone thought you were dead, Lena, Uncle Chin said, shaking his head, his mouth full of pork. Ethan said you'd come to the army base to see him and then were supposed to return to the village. When you never showed up, well, people assumed the worst. That you'd been, on the road. So that was the story Ethan had spun. That I had gone to find him and then vanished. It was a convenient narrative that painted him as the concerned almost fiancé and me as the foolish, tragic girl. It absolved him of immediate responsibility while maintaining his image. Uncle Chin looked around the busy restaurant, his gaze lingering on the cash register. But look at you. A business owner. A rich woman. You must come back, Lena. You must show everyone you're alive. The Reeds, they were so worried. The Reeds weren't worried about me. They were worried about their son's reputation. A missing ward was a stain. A dead one was a tragedy they could mourn. A successful, independent one was an inconvenient loose end. Uncle Chin, I said, my voice calm but firm. I'm doing very well here. This is my home now. Please tell everyone back in the village that I am safe and healthy. Tell them not to worry about me. But I will not be going back. He tried to persuade me, talking about duty, about my father's memory, about the proper place for a woman. I listened politely but offered no further explanation. I paid for his meal, gave him a box of pastries for his journey, and saw him to the door. He left, shaking his head, a messenger from a world I had willingly escaped. After he was gone, a restless energy filled me. The past had found a crack, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it pushed its way fully back in. The knock came a few weeks later, on a quiet evening after I had closed the restaurant and was walking back to my apartment. The street was dark, lit only by the faint glow from nearby windows. A tall figure stepped out of the shadows, blocking my path. My heart seized. I knew that silhouette, that ramrod-straight posture, even before my eyes adjusted to the dim light. Ethan. He stood there in his uniform, his handsome face drawn and haggard, etched with a complexity of emotions I couldn't quite decipher. There was exhaustion, yes, and anger, but also something else. A raw, bewildered shock. Lena, he said, his voice hoarse. You have no idea how hard it's been to find you. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just waited, my keys cold and hard in my hand. Come back with me, he pleaded, the words sounding foreign and stilted on his tongue. Your family is waiting for you. You don't know how worried I've been these past 6 months. Thank God you're safe. If something had happened to you, I'd never forgive myself. The performance was almost perfect. Almost. But I could see the calculation behind his eyes, the frustration that his carefully controlled world had a rogue element in it. Me. Ethan, I said, my voice flat. I told you already. I will never appear in your life again. Leave. I'm not going back. His face darkened, the anger winning out over the feigned concern. The humiliation of being defied by someone he considered his responsibility was too much to bear. Lena, I came all the way here to bring you back, he snapped, his voice rising. What more do you want? You're just jealous of Isabella, aren't you? Let me tell you, nothing improper has ever happened between us. He was still trapped in the narrative of our past life, believing my every action was a move in a game for his affection. And if you don't believe me, he continued, a desperate, arrogant edge to his voice, then let's go back, get the marriage certificate, and hold the wedding. I know you care about me and I care about you too. Let's just get married. All right. The absurdity of it, the sheer, breathtaking arrogance almost made me laugh. He was offering me the very cage I had broken out of as a consolation prize. I shook my head, not in anger but in a kind of pity. Ethan, when did I ever say I had feelings for you? I'm not refusing to go back because I'm jealous. I simply don't want to return to that small mountain village. I don't want to return to you. The certainty in my voice finally pierced his armor. The confusion on his face was genuine now. The relief I had expected to see was there, yes. The relief of a man released from an unwanted duty. But it was mingled with something I hadn't anticipated. A bruised ego, a flicker of pure, uncomprehending hurt. He couldn't process a world where Lena Miller did not want Ethan Reed. "Claire, do you really mean it?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "You're truly not going to marry me? But you once said you wanted to be with me forever." "That girl is dead, Ethan," I said softly. Every word. I saw the finality register in his eyes. He had found me, but he had lost the idea of me forever. He stood there for a long moment, a statue of conflicted pride and shattered assumptions, before he finally turned and walked away, disappearing back into the shadows from whence he came. I unlocked my door, stepped inside my apartment and closed the door on the ghost of my past. This time I knew it was for good. With Ethan's departure, a profound and lasting peace settled over my life. The door to the past was not just closed. It was locked, bolted, and the key thrown into the deepest part of the Pearl River. The fear of being found, of being dragged back, had vanished. I was utterly, completely free. My energy, once divided between building my future and guarding against my past, was now funneled entirely into my work. Lena's kitchen became more than a restaurant. It became a local institution. I introduced new dishes, experimented with flavors from other regions, and even started a small, lucrative catering service for the factory managers' meetings. The money I earned was no longer just a means of survival. It was a tool for building a legacy. I opened a savings account, watching the numbers grow with a sense of security I had never known in either of my lives. I made one annual concession to the past. Every spring, on the anniversary of my father's death, I would take the train back to the village. I never stayed long. I would clean his grave, leave fresh flowers and incense, and whisper a few words of reassurance to his spirit. "I'm well, Father. I'm safe. I'm happy." I avoided the village center, slipping in and out like a ghost. On one of these visits, I saw Mrs. Reed from a distance. She looked older, her shoulders stooped, the picture of kindly virtue replaced by a pinched weariness. I felt nothing. No hatred, no sympathy. Just a distant acknowledgement, like observing a character from a sad story I had once read. It was on my third annual visit, while buying incense at the small county market, that I heard the first whispers. The woman running the stall, recognizing me, leaned forward with a gossip's gleam in her eye. "You heard about the Reed's boy, didn't you? Such a shame." I kept my expression neutral, arranging my purchase. "No, I haven't." "Oh, it's a mess," she continued, not needing any encouragement. "He married that city girl, Isabella, you know? The pretty one. Well, pretty doesn't cook the rice, does it? She heard you were making a fortune in business down in Ocean City. Gotta be in her bonnet. Started pestering Ethan for money, wanted to open some fancy shop." This was news to me. I had built a wall around my life, and no news of the Reeds had penetrated it. Ethan, of course, refused, the woman clucked. "A soldier's pay is a soldier's pay." But that Isabella, she had a will of her own. While the old folks were out in the fields, she went through their house. Took their life savings, every yuan they'd scraped together from decades of work. Took all of Ethan's saved-up wages too. Gave it all to some smooth-talking business partner, who promised a big return on a textile investment. I could see it unfolding as clearly as if I had been there. Isabella, ambitious and restless, seeing my success as a blueprint. Ethan, rigid and principled, refusing to engage in the grubby business of commerce. The reckless, desperate gamble. "Poof," the woman said, flicking her fingers. "Gone. All of it." The man disappeared. The money was never seen again. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. It wasn't satisfaction. It was a grim, poetic justice that felt less like a victory and more like the inevitable conclusion of a flawed design. The fighting was terrible, they say. The gossip continued, savoring the drama. Ethan was furious. Wanted a divorce right then and there. But then, well, then they found out she was pregnant. Of course. The final, inescapable trap. Duty once again clamped its jaws shut on Ethan Reed. He couldn't divorce the mother of his child, not without creating a scandal that would cripple his career far more than a miserable marriage ever could. "I heard he put in for a transfer," she finished, lowering her voice. "Volunteered for border defense. Up in the frozen north. Left her here with the old folks. She lives in that house like a ghost, just like you." She caught herself, blushing furiously. I mean, well, you know. I nodded, paid for my incense and left. As I stood before my father's grave, the news swirled in my mind. Ethan had gotten everything he thought he wanted. He had married his beloved Isabella, free from the obligation of me. And it had ruined him. His parents' security was gone, his savings vanished, his marriage a hollow shell, and his career had taken him to the most remote and desolate posting possible, a self-imposed exile. He had escaped the cage of a marriage to me only to build a more gilded, more painful one for himself. The weight of his duty to Isabella and his child would be far heavier than any debt he felt he owed me. I felt a pang not for him but for the tragic, predictable waste of it all. He was a man who lived by a strict code, but that code had no room for love, only for obligation and honor. And in the end, it was honor that had led him to this cold, lonely place. I finished my prayers and left the graveyard. I didn't look towards the Reed house. Their story was no longer mine. Their unraveling was their own tragedy. I had my own tapestry to weave, and the threads were bright, strong, and entirely of my own choosing. I boarded the train back to Ocean City, back to my kitchen, back to my life. The past had finally finished its dying, and I was alive, more alive than I had ever been. The years unfolded like a steady, prosperous river. The frantic energy of Ocean City's early reform years matured into a sustained, powerful boom. The city I had arrived in as a wide-eyed fugitive was now a gleaming metropolis, a testament to China's audacious new dream. My little restaurant, Lena's Kitchen, had been part of that transformation. I never expanded into a chain or built a grand empire. That wasn't my ambition. My success was measured in different ways. In the loyalty of my staff, many of whom had been with me for years and now managed their own families. In the satisfied faces of the customers who still flocked to my doors, some of them the same factory workers who had been my first patrons, now foremen and managers. In the deep, unshakable peace I felt when I turned the key in my apartment door each night. I had never married. The question, which had once been a source of pitying whispers from relatives and villagers, now felt irrelevant, even amusing. Men had come into my life. A gentle supplier who brought me the best vegetables, a clever accountant who helped me navigate taxes, even a widowed factory owner who saw in me a kindred entrepreneurial spirit. I enjoyed their company, shared meals with them, even felt flickers of affection. But the thought of intertwining my life, my hard-won sovereignty, with another's always felt like a step backward. I had been an appendage once, a duty, a footnote in someone else's story. I would never be that again. I had learned the most valuable lesson of my 2 lifetimes. Lean on the mountains and they'll crumble. Lean on the waters and they'll flow away. The only person you can ever truly rely on is yourself. My self-reliance was my anchor. It was in the bank account that could weather any storm, in the skills I possessed that could feed me anywhere, in the strength of my own 2 hands that had built something from nothing. One rainy afternoon I was visiting a new, modern wholesaler on the other side of the city. I was looking for a specific type of oyster sauce, and this company was said to have the best imports. The office was sleek, all glass and chrome, a world away from my dusty beginnings. As I concluded my business, a woman stepped out of a nearby office, her heels clicking sharply on the polished floor. Our eyes met and time seemed to warp and fold in on itself. It was Isabella. The years had not been kind to her. The delicate beauty that had once seemed so ethereal had hardened. Fine lines etched the corners of her eyes and mouth, and her posture was rigid with a permanent defensiveness. She was dressed well in a stylish but slightly outdated suit, a uniform for a mid-level manager. The vibrant peach dress was a memory. She recognized me instantly. The shock in her eyes was quickly submerged by a wave of old resentment and a new, weary bitterness. "Lena," she said, her voice lacking its former musicality. It was flat, worn smooth by disappointment. "Isabella," I nodded, my own voice calm. There was no anger left in me for her. She too had been a prisoner of Ethan's design, though she had willingly walked into her cell. We stood in an awkward silence, 2 veterans of a war neither of us had truly won, but from which I had at least managed to desert. "I heard you never married," she said finally, the statement an accusation. "I didn't," I replied. She looked around the lavish office, a place that represented a success she had desperately wanted for herself but had failed to grasp. "You have your restaurant." The word was laced with a faint disdain, as if my hands-on success was less worthy than her white-collar position. I do. It provides a good life. Another silence. The unspoken history hung between us. The slap, the confrontation, the stolen money, the failed marriage. He's still up there. On the border, she said abruptly, her gaze fixed on a point past my shoulder. Comes home once a year if that. Sends money. That's it. She wrapped her arms around herself, a self-soothing gesture. He got what he wanted. A spotless record. A quiet, distant wife. No scandals. I said nothing. What was there to say? She looked back at me and for a fleeting second, the mask of bitterness slipped, revealing a profound, bottomless loneliness. He never got over you, you know. I almost laughed. Don't be absurd, Isabella. He never had me to get over. No, she insisted, her voice sharp. Not you. The idea of you. The debt. The obligation. It defined him. When you walked away, you took his purpose with you. Marrying me. It was just what he was supposed to do next. But the fire was gone. Everything was just duty. She spat the word out like a piece of rotten fruit. I spent my life competing with a ghost who didn't even want the prize. Her words were a revelation, not about Ethan's feelings, but about the hollow core of their life together. He was a man who needed a burden to bear to feel whole. I had been that burden, and when I relieved him of it, he had found another in his failed marriage and self-imposed exile. His entire life was a monument to duty, and it was an empty, windswept place. I'm sorry, I said, and I found that I meant it. I was sorry for the young woman she had been, so blinded by love and ambition that she couldn't see the prison she was helping to build. She scoffed, the moment of vulnerability gone. Save your pity. You have your business. I have my job. We both got what we deserved. With that, she turned on her heel and walked away, her back straight, a queen returning to her lonely, crumbling castle. I left the wholesalers, the rain having softened to a fine mist. I thought of Ethan standing watch in some cold, remote outpost, and Isabella, managing her small domain in a glass office. Their lives were a tangled knot of resentment, duty, and regret. My life was simple. It was mine. I had no one to answer to, no one's expectations to meet, no debts to pay. I had my kitchen, my friends, my independence. The storm of the past had finally passed, and in its wake, I had found not just safety, but a profound and lasting contentment. I was whole, I was complete, and I was finally enough. Another decade slipped by, marked not by dramatic events, but by the quiet, satisfying rhythm of a life well lived. I was in my late 40s now, a woman who commanded respect not through loudness, but through a calm, unshakable competence. Lena's kitchen had become an institution, a piece of the neighborhood's soul. The children of my original customers were now bringing their own children, and the story of the tough, kind woman who built a successful business from nothing had passed into local legend. I had diversified my interests. With the profits from the restaurant, I had bought the building that housed it, securing my future against rent hikes and market whims. I had also invested in a few small, promising startups run by young, hungry entrepreneurs who reminded me of my younger self. I was no longer just a restaurateur. I was a minor pillar of the community, a quiet success story. It was during the Mid-Autumn Festival, a time for family reunions, that the letter arrived. It was forwarded from my old village address, a service I paid a small fee to maintain for any official correspondence. The handwriting on the envelope was unfamiliar, a spidery, careful script. I opened it at my kitchen table, the morning sun streaming in. It was from Mrs. Reed. Dear Lena, it began, the formality feeling strange and ancient. I hope this letter finds you well. I am writing to you with a heavy heart. My husband passed away last winter. So, it was quick. I felt a distant pang of sympathy for the old man. He had been a silent participant in my entrapment, but he had also been a figure of my childhood, a constant in the village landscape. Ethan is still stationed on the border. He came back for the funeral, but only for a few days. He is a stranger to me now. The words were stark, filled with a mother's grief that went beyond the death of a spouse. Isabella left 5 years ago. She took their son and moved back to her home city. She said she couldn't live in this empty house anymore, waiting for a man who would never come home. They are divorced now. So the final thread had snapped. Duty had not been enough to hold them together. The child had grown, and Isabella had finally found the courage to escape her own gilded cage. I am an old woman now, Lena, and I am alone. I have had much time to think, and my thoughts often turn to you. I was not a good person to you. We were not good to you. We saw you as a problem to be managed, a duty to be fulfilled. We never saw you as Lena. We used your father's sacrifice and your own grief to box you into a life that suited our son, not you. For that I am deeply, truly sorry. I put the letter down, my hand trembling slightly. An apology. After 30 years, an apology. It didn't erase the past, but it acknowledged its weight. It was a stone dropped into the still pond of my present, sending ripples through time. I do not ask for your forgiveness, for I do not deserve it. I only write to you to say these words so that they are not buried with me. You were always stronger than any of us knew. You had a courage that my son, for all his medals, never possessed. The courage to walk away. I hear you have done very well for yourself. I am glad. Your father would be proud of the woman you became. With regret and best wishes, Mrs. Reed. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. I felt a strange sense of closure, as if a book I had finished long ago had just received a final, poignant postscript. The villains of my story were, in the end, just flawed, limited people, trapped in their own narrow visions of the world. Their acknowledgement changed nothing about my life, but it somehow softened the edges of the memory. A few months later, I received a phone call from the village head. Mrs. Reed had passed away in her sleep. Ethan, he told me, had arranged a simple funeral from afar. He had not come back. The cycle was complete. The house of Reed was empty, its story told. I took a trip back to the village one last time. I didn't go to pay my respects to the Reeds. I went to my father's grave. It was well tended. I paid a local boy to keep it clean. I lit the incense and knelt in the quiet. "Hello, Father," I whispered. "It's me, Lena. I think it's all over now." The wind rustled the leaves of the old oak tree shading his plot. I told him about my life, about the restaurant, about the peace I had found. I didn't speak of anger or revenge. I spoke of contentment. "I learned what you tried to teach me by your own life, Father," I said, my voice soft. "That integrity isn't about what people say about you. It's about being true to yourself. You died saving a man because it was the right thing to do, not for praise or reward. And I lived my life for myself because it was the only true thing I could do. I think you would understand." I stayed until the incense burned down to ash. As I stood to leave, I looked out over the village, nestled in the valley. It was no longer a place of confinement, but simply a place, a point on a map from which I had launched myself into the world. I had come full circle, not as a prisoner returning to her cell, but as a free woman visiting her origins. The past had lost its power to hurt me. It was just a story, and I had written my own better ending. I am an old woman now. My hair, once thick and dark, is a sleek cap of silver. The hands that once scrubbed floors and wielded a heavy wok are adorned with a single simple jade bracelet, a gift I bought for myself on my 50th birthday. The frantic energy of Ocean City has mellowed around me, and I have mellowed with it. I sold Lena's kitchen a decade ago. Not because I had to, but because it was time. I sold it to May and Lynn, my two original waitresses who had become like daughters to me. They run it now with their own children, having modernized the menu but keeping the original name and the spirit of good, honest food served with respect. I still visit sometimes, and they always seat me at my favorite table by the window, bringing me a bowl of my own mapo tofu recipe, a taste that forever links me to the beginning of my freedom. My apartment is spacious and sun-filled, filled with books and plants. I have a wide circle of friends, other business owners who retired, women I met in investment groups, young people who seek me out for advice, seeing me as a kind of entrepreneurial grandmother. I travel sometimes not with a tour group but on my own, exploring the new China I helped build. I have been to the Great Wall, to the Terracotta Warriors, to the tropical beaches of Hainan. I answered to no one. I never saw or heard from Ethan again. I suppose he eventually retired from the army, a colonel with a spotless record and a hollow personal life. Perhaps he found a quiet, solitary peace somewhere. I hope so. The animosity I once carried for him has long since faded to a faint historical footnote. He was a catalyst for my awakening, but he was not the author of my story. On my 65th birthday, I threw a small party for myself at a nice restaurant overlooking the river. May and Lynn were there with their families. My friends were there, laughing and sharing stories. As I looked around the table at the faces of people who loved and respected me for who I was, not for who I was married to, I felt a surge of profound gratitude. This was the life I had chosen. This was the life I had built. It was not the life society had prescribed for an orphaned girl from a mountain village. It was better. After the party, I went for a walk along the riverbank. The lights of the city glittered on the water, a dazzling tapestry of human ambition and dreams. I thought of the young girl I had been, trembling on the train, terrified and hopeful. I thought of the woman I became, slapping Isabella, scrubbing floors, counting her first 3,000 yuan. I thought of all the small, brave decisions that had led me here, to this moment of perfect contentment. A young couple walked past me hand in hand, their heads close together, whispering secrets and dreams. I smiled. Love was a beautiful thing, but it was not the only thing. It was not the sun around which a life had to orbit. My life had orbited around a different star, the star of self. It had been a constant, reliable light, guiding me through loss, through betrayal, through struggle, and ultimately to this quiet, powerful joy. I had lived 2 lifetimes. The first was a lesson in dependence and despair. The second was a masterclass in self-reliance and serenity. I leaned on the railing, the cool metal solid beneath my hands, and looked out at the vast, beautiful, indifferent city. I had not just survived here, I had belonged. I had not just made a living, I had made a life. A life of my own. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. The end.